Hi, Dan Verton, Executive Editor with MeriTalk. I'm here today at the Cyber Security Brainstorm in Washington, D.C., and with me is a very special guest, Mr. Vint Cerf.
Oh, good afternoon.
Thank you very much for being here.
Not at all.
Vint, I've, in preparation for this interview, have done some research over the last few months of your public interviews with various media outlets. They have you being very concerned and frightened almost with the future, the digital future. Why are you so scared of the digital future?
Well, that may be an overstatement, but I am nervous about the digital future for the simple reason that it's becoming more complex and I think more fragile. We are depending increasingly on software and so many appliances, so many things, that when things don't work, which is what I would anticipate, they may have deeper consequences. This is kind of like an infrastructure. The cyberspace is an infrastructure that we are assuming will be there when we need it, sort of like electrical power, which we assume will be there, or the road system, which we assume will be there. And we assume someone else is making sure that it will be there when we need it. And what if it isn't there? That's when we all get upset about infrastructure not working. And so the computing world, the cyberspace world, has risen from a thing that that we interact with from time to time, episodically, to something which is there all the time, that we are implicitly, increasingly reliant upon. And that's what I worry about. The people who are responsible for making that infrastructure work may not be fully incented to recognize how much everyone is depending on it.
So when you say it's not potentially not going to be or could not be there one day, you mean on a large scale, on a broad scale, or is the fact that my refrigerator one day might be off the internet? That's an inconvenience for me, perhaps. But are you talking about a larger infrastructure level disruption?
Well, I think there are multiple possible cases, but let's take the simple one, the one where stuff in the house isn't working. You have a house full of programmed devices. The light bulbs are programmable, they have IP addresses and everything else. And one day, for whatever reason, none of it works. There may not be any mechanical backup in order to recover from all that. And so for you, it's a disaster. But okay, it's an isolated disaster. Too bad, I'm glad it wasn't me, I'm your neighbor. But it's also possible that as we build smart cities, and you hear these terms, we begin to increase our dependency on a broader scale. When the power goes out, it often goes out for a lot of people, and it creates a substantial amount of dislocation. I was in Boston in 1978, during the blizzard, I guess it was February. Mm-hmm. It shut everything down for about 5 days. It was amazing how quickly the facade of society evaporated. People were breaking into grocery stores to get food, not because they were criminals, but because the stores weren't open. And so you will talk to people about these kinds of large-scale disasters and how quickly the society begins to disintegrate. Mm-hmm. That's the kind of thing that I worry about. And then the question is, what kinds of incentives can we put in place? What kinds of technology can we put in place? What kinds of practices can we put in place to mitigate that kind of failure?
Okay. The foundational elements of the internet that we all enjoy today, which you had a big hand in helping to create, are used for large numbers of very great life-altering things. They're also used for some not so great things. Terrorist organizations leverage the internet that we all use. Child exploitation, the list goes on and on. Is the answer to those vexing problems more of a technology solution answer, or is it still a policy answer?
It's actually a societal answer. Policy plays a role in that. Technology can play a role. But these infrastructures are basically neutral in some sense. They don't necessarily have values built into them. There are people who will say, well, the internet is open and it's free and it's because, it is freely accessible. You can make use of it for a variety of different things. And that somehow or other that was built into its architecture because it came out of the academic community, even though it was supported by the Defense Department. There's some truth to all that. But the honest answer is that a lot of these kinds of technologies have both uses and abuses, and that's a decision made by people. And so if we're going to try to persuade people not to use these tools for bad things, we will have to exercise all the tools we normally do. Technical controls to prevent a bad thing from happening. Post hoc enforcement. If we catch you doing X, there will be consequences because our society says that that's not acceptable. And then finally, moral suasion. Just don't do that. It's wrong.
Right.
And although that sounds kind of weak, it's amazing what happens when lots of people decide that's the wrong thing to do.
Now, on that note, so there's a lot of discussion today, obviously, particularly around things like YouTube and Twitter, where bad people are doing very bad things. And I point to the case of ISIS and other terrorist organizations. The argument is, well, I guess the big question is, why can't technology companies do more and act faster to prevent them from leveraging this capability when that content is posted? You know, if I post something potentially inflammatory on Facebook, it's usually down very quickly.
Well, the same tools that would allow Facebook to take down your inflammatory comment would apply to these other things. But this is a decision that's being made, and the private sector is being asked to do value judgment, make value judgments. This is really very difficult because you're asking an organization which is in the business of providing communications to suddenly become an arbiter. Now we're starting to get on the hairy edge of censorship. And I'm not arguing that bad stuff should be left on the net because we shouldn't censor it. I'm not saying that. But I am saying that it's putting the private sector into a really tough position of being a kind of law enforcement cop. It's also the case, but let me take YouTube as an example. There is 400 hours of video being uploaded per minute now to YouTube. There's no way that it's possible for this to be scrutinized other than by some human beings who do the best they can. So notice and takedown is another thing. We tell us. There are buttons here that say this is bad stuff or this is copyright material or something. We have at Google tried to automate detection of music which is under copyright or video that's under copyright in an automatic way. We try to fingerprint that stuff and automatically detect it. And I was actually caught once. I put up a video from a British recording of a conference that we did. And in the middle of the recording, one of the persons who was making a presentation showed a clip from the London Olympic Games. And it was in order to make a point about physics. But when I uploaded the video, somebody, the Olympic Committee, complained that I had, somehow broached their copyrights, and they took it down. YouTube took it down automatically. And then I disputed that, saying, but it was for educational purposes, and then they put it back up again. But so the fact is you could do some of that automatically.
Right.
But in the end, this is a value judgment, and we really need for law enforcement tools to be applied, not by the private sector, but by the appropriate level of government.
Did we just break some news there that YouTube censored Vint Cerf? I mean,
Well,
that's
YouTube's processes automatically censored my uploading of what was a clip from the London Olympics. And it was all understandable and legitimate and everything else, except that my usage was okay, and then we sorted that out.
Last question, because I know you're tight on time and you have to go. What is Vint Cerf's prescription for what has been described as one of the largest transfers of wealth in history, the theft of intellectual property, particularly from US-based companies and government secrets primarily by nation-state sponsored hackers? How do we get past that problem?
Well, it's pretty clear that we need much better security practices than we have today. One of the responses that Google has had to this problem is to encrypt everything. When it's in transit, we encrypt it, whether it's coming from your laptop to our documents or email system. When we move things from one data center to another, which we do a lot of to replicate for redundancy and preservation, we encrypt all of that. We encrypt things when they finally end up at rest, so even if someone physically gets access to something, they may or may not be able to make use of it. So crypto turns out to be your friend in many respects. Also, two-factor authentication is another defense, because a lot of the breaches that occur are because someone got your username and password by a phishing attack or by one of those social engineering things. It's 3 o'clock in the morning. Oh my God, the system's falling apart and I'm the engineer that's responsible for this and I forgot the password and you need to help me or we'll all get fired. You know, it's that sort of thing.
Right.
And you want to fix it so that no matter who that is, if they don't have the second factor, then they can't actually make use of any username and password information. So there are technical practices and procedural things that you can do, in addition to highlighting people's awareness of how those attacks happen and how to correctly discount them.
Right. Well, thank you so much for being here today. I really appreciate your time. I refuse to call you the father of the internet. You get sick of being called the father of the internet?
Well, first of all, I'm not the only person who was involved. Robert Cohn was right there with me. It was 2 hands on 1 pencil. And then there are thousands of people who participated in the evolution of the system over a period of decades. I'm one of them, but you know.
Fair enough. Well, thank you so much for being here again. Dan Verton from MeriTalk, thank you very much for watching.